Hello everyone, today we are looking at Shadow of the Colossus. I love this game, and for some people this is also kind of their fan favorite. There is something about this game that feels almost religious or spiritual, and it's a very basic setup and a very basic story, but it's very, very interesting. So this is the game that actually came out after Ico. However, it might actually be a prequel depending on how you read into the story. And again, it's a very interesting, simple, setup. Essentially, you are this nameless character, something called the Wanderer, and you basically have your girlfriend who seems to have died by unexplained means, and you travel to this ancient land that you're not supposed to go to because apparently the gods there can perform miracles. So you lay her down on an altar, and the god called Dorman says, well, I can resurrect her, but in order to do that, I must be at full power, which requires you to slay the 16 or so Colossi. And so this is a very weird game, again, because there are no small enemies or mobs or anything. This entire game is composed of you going out into the world and slaying bosses. This is just basically a boss run. And each Colossus has a different strategy to it, a different way to beat it, a different weak point to reveal its real weak point, and there's just different ways to go about it. And so the Wanderer is armed with basically a bow and arrow and a sword, and you have unlimited arrows and, whatever. And you also have your horse, Argo. And using your horse and, going across this adventure, you essentially go into this, what I call a dark fantasy adventure to save and resurrect this woman that you love. And there's all these very interesting, weird things about the game, about the themes of light and dark. And in general, it's very interesting controlling Wanderer and his horse. They have definitely a lot of dynamic bones. The way you move, and if you come to a stop, you'll come to a skid, but his poncho will move along with him. It's a really interesting game with a very distinct atmosphere that's very depressive. It feels like this world used to be something and someone did something that destroyed it, and a lot of the trees are lifeless. There are some corners of the world where there's some beautiful groves and vegetation has taken over, but there's also a lot of ruins in this world, and it feels like an ancient civilization essentially collapsed, and you're trying to reformat the pieces of exactly what happened to the god of this world, of this land, really, because the god is tied to the land here, and exactly what happened. It's a mystery and an action adventure game. And so when you go out into the world, this holy blade or a special blade that you have, when you hold it up to the light, will reveal the location of your next Colossus. And I remember this game has always been a huge cultural impact. People have always looked at it and marveled, back in the day, oh, look at those mechanics, that's so cool. I think what's the most technically impressive thing about this game is the stamina bar. And so essentially when you fight the Colossi, you essentially have to climb up the Colossus, and using using certain platforms and different things of the Colossus themselves, because they're kind of partially organic but also partially made of the ruins and stone themselves. And so they're this weird combination of something that is living and also not living at the same time. What's also interesting, I guess this is technically one of the first open world games, and it's appropriate that they made it like this because there is nothing in this world except the bosses. But you can totally get lost in the world and wander around and find these weird areas where they're populated, they have items and assets in it, they even have save points, but there's nothing around. And it's very, very awkward and weird that these places that you'd never go to just exist, and you think, is this part of the mystery and the world? And of course, the logical explanation is that originally for this game, they had planned out something like 40 or 50 Colossus battles, but could only fit in 16. So obviously those areas were coded and created for that purpose. But again, it just has this feeling of mystery that you've come across this destroyed apocalyptic land, and you basically are going around, discovering it, not caring about how you might get cursed or what's in there, because you need to save essentially your companion. And so again, when you're climbing on these colossi, you have a stamina bar which slowly drains, which is as a circle instead of a meter, which is already something kind of cool. And you kind of hold L1 to hold on and also to let go. And so there's certain parts where you need to drop down. And when you drop down, you'll actually dangle a bit depending on your momentum. And so back in the day, this was all very impressive. The fact of just how the Wanderer actually moved in the environment was really interesting, and how the stamina bar worked and all this other stuff was very, very unique. Also part of the Colossus boss fights themselves, because there is a certain way they react. They act as puzzles and combat scenarios at the same time, and even the in-between time to reach the next Colossus, you're gonna have to do some platforming as well. So this kind of has all the elements of a action adventure game, but they're kind of all just spread out and also really focused. And I find that's what a lot of games lack now, is a lack of distinct focus of like, okay, you're supposed to go here, and yes, this is an open world, but we're going to give you a very clear path that where the only places with stuff in it in these specific areas. And again, with each Colossus, they have a different kind of habit and nature and a different way to take them on, in order to actually get close to them or make them make a mistake, so you can use that to crawl up them. They each have a different way of doing it. And again, the size of these things cannot be understated, because they feel massive and huge and cumbersome. And again, from the screen shake to everything, it feels very, very distinct. And of course, the main component is when you are climbing up the Colossus, it's trying to shake you off, which will drastically, take down your stamina meter. And usually most of the Colossus, they have their weak point, usually near the top of their head, on their forehead, or on a different part of their body that's hard to get to. And so you essentially want to be able to learn its mannerisms, its attack patterns, plan around those, and be able to mount it, hang on, and stab it about a dozen times until it goes off and is finally defeated. What's also very interesting, though, on the spiritual aspect, is that every time you beat a Colossus, it's like this dark spirit goes inside you, and there's a new dark figure that kind of goes and fuses with your soul. And as you go over the course of the game, the Wanderer's, aesthetic and his actual person will begin to deteriorate. His poncho will become ripped. He'll become filled with, gashes and bruises and scrapes. And he will, and there'll be this weird shadow darkness in his eyes that is very kind of weird and supernatural and kind of iconic. Again, it's a very cinematic game. If you stand still, your HUD tends to disappear. There's also a lot of very cool little, areas and stuff that you can explore. And again, it feels like the Wanderer controls like he's a real person. He feels very distinct in his movements and his actions. And what's really cool is you can almost climb almost anything in this game. It's almost like Breath of the Wild took a while for it to get to this point, but it's kind of like the same kind of idea. You're able to essentially, climb almost anything in the game. You're just restricted by your stamina wheel. And also, you need to know when to jump in this game. You can also jump from your horse and do certain actions like that. And the main thing is being able to find the fur on the giants and how to climb them. But yeah, every time you kill a giant, you get more and more deteriorated, or a Colossus rather. And, some of these colossi, they're actually very small. They're kind of like a medium-sized boar, one of them. But most of them are usually these gigantic things. And, you just need to be careful of your health bar when you fall off the Colossus. But yeah, there's this whole thing about light and darkness, and the fact that the god that is speaking to you, Dorman, is a being of pure light speaking from this temple, and all of these colossi are essentially made up of essentially beings of darkness. And so you're wondering, what is the nature of the human soul in this game? Is it light or darkness? And are these colossi used to be people? What's going on? Another thing that I guess I might as well bring up here, since we're talking about it, is there's a series of documentaries done on YouTube about the actual files in Shadow of the Colossus, and I found them to be extremely fascinating, because there are things in here that you wouldn't think would be. There are certain parts in the game where you get this monologue by these guys who basically found out that you left for this sacred land, or the rather cursed land, and they essentially are pursuing you. And so there's these chieftains who are giving history of the land, saying he should have never gone there. He has woken up, the beast essentially, and all this other stuff. You essentially, you were given like a tiny kind of history lesson, and there's a very few cutscenes in this game, but they do play throughout the game. But anyway, the files they found in this game were drawings of Robert Flood and his esoteric images of the world being created as depicted in Genesis, but through an esoteric context during the Enlightenment period. And these images never really show up in the game, but the fact that they are in the game files gives you an idea of what they were kind of inspired by or going with for this game. So again, there's something deeply kind of spiritual and religious about this game, about the dualities of light and dark, how one creates the other, and how essentially the meaning behind each action and the god and the deception, they all kind of come together in this very weird package. And so again, I'm going to spoil the ending because it's something I just need to talk about. It's so fascinating. Is at the end of the game, by the way, Dorman, spelled backwards, is Nimrod, which is, this ancient god of Babylon and Sumer. And so this being of pure light, after you've ingested all of these, pieces of darkness, he does actually keep his promise, and, the woman gets revived. But the problem is that you have turned into a Colossus, and you have become this being of total darkness. And it's just really interesting to see how they play with the elements of creation and light and darkness, and something very Gnostic about the whole thing. And so essentially you play the last chapter as one of the Shadow Colossus that the other people arrived just in time to defeat you, that were saying, oh, he should have never come here. And what's really fascinating is also they basically are able to defeat you, and in this basically pond of water that you find when you first enter the temple, you fall into that and you are reborn as a child with horns. And so it's implied that you're this weird demon child, and also possibly Ico from the previous game. However, that might not be the exact case, because at the beginning of Ico, it's kind of implied that this is where they send demon children. So you couldn't have been the first. And it also implies that you were born into a village that already had this custom, and you're not in this land where you're totally abandoned and your mother is raising you by herself. And so yeah, the lore and the context and for what the game means and what is going on is just really, really interesting. And of course, I forgot to mention the music. The music in this game is phenomenal. It is something absolutely amazing. The orchestration is incredible, and every Colossus fight has a great theme to it, which again really adds, because that's the real attraction. And so I would say, in a way similar to a game like No More Heroes, you're always so curious, after beating the last Colossus, to get to the next one, to see what it's like. I mean, there's one that's like a sand serpent, one that's like a bull, one that has a giant sword and smashes the ground. one that has a giant club, and it's more like a barbarian, and they all have really interesting, unique designs. And it's so interesting that they had originally almost 40 of these planned. But yeah, this is a very big cult hit for a reason that a lot of people love this game, and it's very kind of easy to see why. It deals with a lot of esoteric, aspects, as well with a very kind of emotional story that's told mostly through actions and not dialogue or narrative. And again, the whole tone of the game, it's a dark, weird fantasy. And I think dark fantasy is my absolute favorite genre. Like no exceptions. It always is a fascinating thing to me. When you are the hero, but in a destroyed world. And again, I just think it's super, super cool what this game was able to pull off and the emotions it makes you feel. And again, it just feels like you're playing something classic. There's something about this game that is just very classic, very spiritual, and very cool. Anyway, with all that said, guys, I think I'll leave it there, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.